What's your family's darkest secret? A couple of weeks ago I found out that my wife cheated on me 6 years ago. The way I found out is that her sister told me after going to visit her to find out how the delivery of her first child was. She confessed to me that 6 years ago my wife told her that she slept drunk with her best friend. In her words, my wife was very sorry. At the time she told me I was with my son, and immediately after leaving her house, I went to take a paternity test with him, fearing the worst. A week later I got the results and my fears came true. My son was not mine, and for some reason, I began to see the boy differently, more as an acquaintance than a son. With proof in hand, I confronted my wife at night when the child was sleeping. She asked me who told me, and I simply told her that it was none of her business, although obviously, it would not take long to connect the dots that it was her sister. Well, that is not my problem now. Regardless of that, I asked her for a divorce, which is now in process. She was devastated. She swore to me more than once that nothing would happen with anyone again, and that she has been faithful to me in body and soul since then. I held back the urge to insult her to avoid complications during the divorce issue, not believing a word she said, mostly blaming the alcohol instead of taking the blame herself. After talking about it, she threatened me saying that she would demand full custody of the child. I was so annoyed at that moment that I told her, okay, I don't want anything to do with something that is not mine, that she keep the child and I'll keep the dogs. After my words she tried to convince me to take care of the child with her, that I am his father. At that moment I exploded. I was so angry and I had held back so much the urge to scream that I just yelled at her to go and take her bastard with her. A week had passed since then, and she went to her parents' house with her kid. She has not called me since then. She left with everything and the half-asleep kid when I yelled at her, especially since it was the first time I really yelled at her. It sure affected her. I talked to my parents and my dad told me that I did the right thing and that I shouldn't be raising something that is not of my blood. I agree with him. However, the pain is still there. I am currently seeing a therapist 3 times a week, who told me that I have already taken the first step, which was to leave behind what causes me pain. It just hurts to know that my family no longer exists. Regarding why my sister-in-law told me everything, according to her, she felt guilty seeing me always happy with my son, knowing that he may not be mine, and that the fact that we went to visit her in a moment of weakness caused her to completely break down with guilt. I don't know how true that is. I just know that right now I feel tremendous hatred for my wife and a feeling of pain and resentment for the child, although it's just time to get ahead. My therapist recommended that I not see him or her, and that regardless of the child's feelings, I should focus on my own first. That the child is no longer my problem, and the sooner I accept it, the better. Not even 3 days later my ex came to my house and asked to come in. I went out and met her at the door. I told her that she was not going to set foot in my house while I was here, and if she was going to say anything, let it be at the door. She practically begged me to take her son back, that if I wanted to cut off all contact with her, that's fine, that she deserves it, but that she can't raise a child alone, that she has a job and raising him alone is going to destroy her dream of being a notary. I tried to explain to her in the calmest way I could that my therapist was the one who recommended I cut off all contact with the two of them, and to please leave my door before I lost my mind. I love the child, but I don't want to take out my anger on an innocent, even less considering that this innocent child is the product of her inability to keep her legs closed. The child deserves better, and she is currently responsible for giving it to him. I don't know how, but that's not my problem anymore. After that we talked a little more. She resisted the urge to try to cry and make a scene because, once again, we were on the street and she is someone who always took into account what people said about her. The last thing she asked me was to at least let her see the dogs. I told her no, that the best thing is for them to get used to her absence. Seeing her again after so much time will only make them euphoric. After that she just nodded and left. 2 days after that she called me when she received the divorce papers. My mistake was answering the phone because immediately after about 30 minutes she was yelling, to which I later managed to say that the papers must have the number of my civil lawyer, so she can call her if she has any questions. After that I silenced her number. She has not come to my house since then nor tried to call again. That same day I contacted a friend that I made during my master's degree and I told her to go out. She accepted, and well, we've been going out since then. Finally last Friday I told her to be an exclusive couple and she accepted. She has slept at my house for a few days, and she already knows my dogs and adores them, which I appreciate because I couldn't start something with someone who doesn't accept my pets. Started from the bottom, now we're here.
When I turned 16, my parents forced me into marriage. No one told me that I'd be marrying my father. Last year it was my eldest sister. This year it's my turn. I didn't have what most people would call a normal childhood, at least not by modern standards. My mother and father raised me and my 2 sisters in a very old school sort of fashion. According to my parents, children were to be seen and not heard. There was no laughing or playing. We spoke when we were spoken to unless we were alone with each other. But even then it was only hushed tones and hushed voices. Our mother made our dresses on the sewing machine until she wasn't afraid that our fingers would get caught in the threads, and then we learned to make our own. We would get beautiful cloth of all colors except for white. When I asked for white so I could make an Easter dress, I was told that white was only for my day. I didn't know what that meant, and she wouldn't explain any further. Our mother was also our teacher. We were taught how to read basic arithmetic and how to cook. She would smile when everything was perfect and say, "You will make him so happy." One day, the one time I asked who he was, I was spanked with a wooden spoon so hard I couldn't sit down for 2 days. My oldest sister, Julie, Julie would sneak ice while my younger sister Anna would keep an eye out if they were caught soothing or comforting me. They would suffer the same, if not worse. Our father had a very good job when he would come home. Our mother would hand him a drink, take off your shoes, and give him a foot massage. He would watch the news while she served him dinner, his slippery feet propped on the ottoman. He would sometimes ask us to show him what we did for the day, be it sewing or penmanship. One day when I was 16, I caught my mother in the kitchen weeping. She was clutching her pearl necklace, her mascara running down her face, her curls not as tight as they normally were. "Mama," I said timidly. She looked at me and cracked a smile. "Abigail," she crooned. She wrapped her arms around me and sobbed into my shoulder. She stroked my hair. "You know, you were always my favorite, right?" I looked around, hoping none of my sisters had heard that. That day, Father came home with a few different lengths of white cloth for my sister, with a pattern, for a beautiful wedding gown. Julie had just turned 18. "It's time you became a woman," Father declared. "It's time for you to be married. You have until 2 days to finish the dress." Our jaws dropped. That was a short amount of time for the delicate pattern. "Father," Julie said timidly, "can Abby and Anna help me?" He looked at her for a moment. "Of course." Father kissed her on the cheek. This was new. He had never shown any affection to any of us before. We got to work, taking turns on the sewing machine. Father and Mother came into the room. Mother was wearing her traveling coat, something that I don't recall her ever doing in my entire life. She was no longer crying, but smiling despite the tears in her eyes. She was wearing her pearl necklace. "Your mother has to go see your grandma back in Oregon. She's very ill," Father stated. "I'm taking her to the airport." We nodded in acknowledgement and went back to work. It wasn't until later that I realized that my mother had no suitcases with her. Father didn't come home until the early hours of the morning. Julie and I finished her dress. "You were going to look beautiful on your wedding day," I said to her. She started to cry. "I don't want to get married." Tears were streaming down her face, but I tried to console her. Father called for us to put the dress back on the mannequin and come back into the room. "Girls," he cleared his throat, "there was an accident. Your mother's plane crashed and she's gone." We started to cry. "But the wedding ceremony is still happening tomorrow as planned." That night, Julie came into my room after Father went to sleep. She whispered to me, "I think we're in trouble." "Why?" I whispered back. She shook her head and started to cry. The next day, a strange man came into the house. I was told to go get Julie ready for the wedding. We assumed that the man that came was the groom, but he had said nothing to us. The music started playing on our RCA record player. It was the song, "Here Comes the Bride." I helped Julie with her veil and I walked behind her, helping her with her train. The man that came in was the minister. Father stood at the side of the altar where the groom would stand, holding his hands up to Julie. In one hand was a ring, and in the other the pearl necklace that I had last seen on Mother Anna, and I were too stunned and too scared to speak. Julie was silently crying while Father and the minister were smiling from ear to ear. "Will there be anything else?" the minister asked my father. "No, pick whichever one you want," Father said regarding Anna and myself. He sized us up for a moment before he grabbed in his hand. "Julie, Abby." She started to struggle and cry, but the minister quickly backhanded her into silence. They left quickly. "Abigail," Father stated, "you are old enough to make yourself supper. Your mother and I have some business to attend to." He picked Julie up and carried her to the bedroom over the next year. Life continued as it had. Julie slipped into the role of mother for fear that Father would punish her. Somehow he always knew if we broke the rules. Julie told me he's always watching and listening to her. I'd hear her sobbing when she was alone, but if I went to comfort her, she'd punish me. She continued my lessons, but she wasn't always there, at least mentally. 2 days ago, I found her in the bathtub, the water crimson. I tried to help her, but she was already gone before I could even get to the emergency phone. Father was home. He picked Julie up out of the tub. "I'm going to go get help," he said, and left me alone. When he returned, he had white fabric for me to make my dress, and he gave me 2 days to finish it. I asked him if I could get a new pattern online so that it would be different from Julie's. He thought about it for a minute, and he told me it was okay. He had some errands to run, and he'd be back soon. All the websites I've tried to get help on are blocked, except for some sites with patterns on them. I can't find help anywhere, but somehow I ended up writing this here as I stitched the final touches on the white dress. I glanced at the clock, midnight, and Father would be home soon. I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping up my spine. Suddenly, the lights flickered. I paused the needle halfway through the fabric. The room plunged into darkness. A storm was brewing outside. Each peal of thunder shook the house and lightning illuminated the corners of the room. I remembered that our home was old and the electrical circuit wasn't trustworthy. In the pitch black, I fumbled my way into the kitchen, squinting to find the flashlight. I flicked it on the light, illuminating my surroundings. But that's when I saw a crack on the floor near the pantry that I'd never seen before. Curiosity overcoming my fear. I approached it as I got closer. I could see that it was actually a trap trapdoor, cleverly concealed under a rug. I knelt, placing my hand on the wooden planks. I hesitated. The unknown was terrifying, but I knew I had to find out what was underneath. I took a deep breath and lifted the trapdoor. A set of stone steps led down into the darkness. As I descended, I shined my flashlight around my breath, hitched as the light fell upon a sight I was not prepared for. Chains and locks hanging on the walls, a small bed in the corner. It was a room, a prison. The room was not empty. On the bed lay a figure. It was Anna, looking frail and weak. Her eyes were sunken and there were bruises on her arms and neck. Instead of going to find help, he dragged Anna down here, leaving her on her deathbed. My voice was barely above a whisper, Abby. I couldn't escape. She croaked, but she didn't need to finish. I knew who he was. I moved towards her, intending to free her, but suddenly a sound echoed through the house. The front door opened. Father was home. I quickly turned off the flashlight, enveloping us in darkness. My heartbeat was echoing in my ears. I needed to go back upstairs. I needed to act normal, but I couldn't leave Anna behind. No, go, and I whispered weakly, sensing my hesitation. But before I could respond, the overhead light came on, flooding the room with an eerie dim light. I turned. My blood turned to ice as I saw the figure standing at the top of the stairs. Well, Abigail, it was Father's voice, echoing with a twisted amusement. You found our little secret too, but you can't tell anyone. And with a sinister laugh that echoed throughout the room, he closed the trapdoor, leaving me in the dark with Anna. The horrifying realization dawned upon me. This was the fate of the daughters who turned 18, a cycle of torment, a monstrous secret, and a predator in the form of a father. It was my turn now to live in darkness. The last thing I heard was the sound of the latch locking the trapdoor. I was trapped and alone, and I had no idea what would come next, but I did know one thing. I don't think my father wants to marry me anymore.